Okay, so today's episode is another double bill, taking a look at two movies that have a couple of things linking them. One, I saw both of them in the cinema on the exact same day. Two, they both feature teenage female protagonists. Three, they're the remnants of an originally planned video in which I would review these two films, as well as the Olivia Wilde directorial debut Booksmart, which I've only heard great things about and I've been really looking forward to seeing, but for some reason it's just really hard to find a cinema nearby that's actually playing it, so I might have to wait until DVD and Blu-ray to see that one, unfortunately. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Cue the intro. This movie is set in 1992. Professor Xavier, played by James McAvoy, has made his group of X-Men international superheroes, but this causes concern with Jennifer Lawrence's mystique, especially after Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner, is infected by a strange, mysterious force during a space rescue mission. Soon Jean's psychic abilities begin to exponentially grow, and she's visited by a mysterious woman, played by Jessica Chastain, who wants to unlock Jean's true power. Meanwhile, the X-Men are in conflict over what to do about Jean after a tragic encounter which results in Dr. Hank McCoy, aka Beast, played by Nicholas Hoult, seeking out Eric Lehnsherr, formerly known as Magneto, played by Michael Fassbender, in order to seek revenge and destroy the Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix is the latest installment in the Fox X-Men franchise, and it's had quite the uphill battle ever since it was first announced in 2017. Of course, this isn't the first time that the Dark Phoenix storyline has been adapted to film, as it was previously incorporated into the mess that was X-Men The Last Stand, where it was practically shoehorned into an already overstuffed monstrosity of a narrative, and not really given the gravitas or focus that it really should have. Especially since the first two films had spent so much time setting things up for Famke Janssen's take on Jean Grey to eventually become the Phoenix in a future installment. And now that that film has been ostensibly made non-canon thanks to the events of X-Men Days of Future Past, it does give the filmmakers an opportunity to try again and make up for their previous shortcomings with the Dark Phoenix storyline. But like I said, this movie really just has so much going against it. It's coming off the heels of a lackluster installment that really disappointed with both fans and critics alike. It was originally set for release last year and has been pushed back constantly ever since. It's been allegedly reshot to hell and back. It's being written and directed by the same guy who wrote X-Men 3 and was involved in the disastrous Fan 4 stick. But easily the biggest obstacle is one that's not even really the movie's fault, as it's being released against the backdrop of the recent acquisition of Fox by Disney. And since this is a 20th Century Fox production of a Marvel property and Disney owns Marvel Studios, it's only natural that Disney will want to reboot the X-Men several years down the line. So in many respects, regardless of how this movie fares, whether it's good or not, this is sort of like the end of an era for the franchise. And I can assume that most people are generally looking at it with pure apathy at best, and absolute disdain at worst. And that kind of stinks, because as much as I am a big fan of the MCU, as many of my previous reviews have made clear, I do really like the Fox X-Men movies, most of them at least. I really like the first two films directed by Third one is okay, but definitely reeks of too many cooks in the kitchen. X-Men Origins Wolverine, of course, is an absolute load of shite. And the rest of the films I do have on Blu-ray. That should tell you how I feel about them. And if you're wondering why I don't have the Deadpool movies here, I don't really count the Deadpool films as part of the official X-Men series. It feels very spun off from the overall franchise. It feels very much like its own thing. So I definitely said that the Fox take on the X-Men franchise has been more hit than miss. Certainly a lot more than their takes on the Fantastic Four. And since this is undoubtedly going to be the last X-Men film, bar New Mutants, which, let's face it, I don't even think is ever actually going to come out at this point. I think it's going to keep getting pushed back and pushed back for all eternity. I think we're probably all going to be dead before that movie comes out. But this being the finale of the franchise, I was genuinely rooting for it and hoping that I could stick up for it. And I was genuinely hoping for this to be some kind of a high note for the franchise. Unfortunately, it isn't. In fact, Dark Phoenix is honestly the worst possible way they could have ended this franchise. Like, real talk, I had a very hard time writing this review because it's just so damn hard to talk about. Like, it's bad, but it's not bad in a particularly interesting or unique kind of way. It's just really damn boring. It's very, 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 very goddamn tedious. It's just under 2 hours, and yet somehow it feels so much longer than that. This movie feels like an absolute slog to get through. And what's worse is that it's genuinely trying to be a very intimate and dramatic film. It's trying to be very deep and nuanced and introspective, but none of the emotional moments land. In fact, most of the time they just completely fall flat. None of the emotional moments have any heft or weight to them, and yet again it completely screws up the Dark Phoenix storyline. In fact, I'd even argue that it manages to somehow make X-Men 3's handling of that storyline look so much better in retrospect. Because say what you will about X-Men 3, for all of its faults, and it does have a lot of faults, at least the groundwork for a great film is there. At least the groundwork for the Dark Phoenix storyline is there. It's been laid out in the previous 2 films. This movie is trying to do the same, but yet it doesn't feel anywhere near as earned. We've already had one film with this incarnation of Jean Grey where she barely had any screen time or development, so jumping straight into the Dark Phoenix storyline without any of that character development or growth really does the story to this film a massive disservice right out of the gate. It reminds me a lot of Batman v Superman and how it crowbars in Doomsday and the death of Superman, but without truly earning it. And that's really a shame because Sophie Turner isn't too bad as Jean Grey. In fact, I'd say she's easily the best thing about this film. She captures the innocence, the vulnerability, and the sheer destructive power of the character quite well. In fact, if somebody was to ever do a film like this in sort of like a horror movie, I think Sophie Turner would be quite good in it, in fact. I mean, I'd love to see like somebody do like a sort of distinctively Brian De Palma-esque take on the Dark Phoenix storyline, or even like a Cronenbergian take on the story. Like, change the names, change the storyline up a wee bit. You can have a good movie out of that, and Sophie Turner would be damn good in it. You can tell that she's really given the role her all, and I think she is genuinely trying her best to make this movie work. What a shame then that very few people in this film are. Jennifer Lawrence has never looked more disinterested as Mystique, and it seems that the level of apathy even extends to the makeup, which looks so damn cheap in comparison to how she looked in the other films. Like, seriously, this movie has like a $200 million budget, and this is how she looks? What? And then you also have the likes of Alexandra Shipp as Storm, Cody Smith-McPhee as Nightcrawler, Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, and Evan Peters as Quicksilver, who are just in and out of the movie. Not even Michael Fassbender can lift this movie out of the doldrums. He's been pretty much the unsung hero of these films. I mean, he practically elevates Apocalypse for all of its flaws, and yet somehow he just looks so disinterested and tired throughout it all. Like, you can tell he just does not give a shit. Like, he really doesn't want to be here. The only other actor in this film who does provide some enjoyment, albeit of the unintentional variety, is James McAvoy, who more often than not just looks like he stepped right off the set of Glass before shooting this film, and that does provide some unintentional laughs, but that's really about it. The rest of the film is a joyless bore. The film's handling of its characters is easily one of its biggest failings for me. The likes of Storm, Nightcrawler, and Quicksilver are all background players with literally fuck all to do. Quicksilver especially is taken out very early on, and there's seldom any cool scenes with him, which is kind of a bummer because, again, he did at least have some fun scenes in the last couple of films. Like, of course, there's that great scene in Days of Future Past, or that really fun scene in Apocalypse where he runs around and saves everybody. Those are fun scenes, and yet there's nothing of that sort in this film. Cyclops is largely yet again wasted and underutilized, and that's easily been one of the biggest problems with the Fox incarnation of the X-Men. Cyclops is supposed to be a pivotal part in the X-Men series, and yet every film he's been in, he's either been relegated to a supporting role, unceremoniously killed off, brought back for a cameo, and then yet again wasted and given nothing to do. But hey, at least the first 3 films had an excuse. He was playing second fiddle to Wolverine. But this movie, it really doesn't have an excuse. Even the villains of the movie are woefully underdeveloped. Jessica Chastain is a great actress. I think we can all agree on that. She's absolutely fantastic. But as this mysterious alien creature trying to harness Jean's powers, she doesn't come across as a particularly interesting villain, or even all that particularly menacing. Her motivations are just pure generic at best, and it doesn't exactly help that they've went with a random one-issue alien that isn't even connected with the X-Men for its main villain, and that's really baffling, quite frankly. I don't know why they went with that. Maybe they went in that direction because of rights issues, or maybe the character originally had a different name but it was changed in reshoots, because the film is just so clueless about Chastain's role and her overall purpose, and she just feels like an extremely one-note villain that manages to make Apocalypse from the last movie seem interesting by comparison. Xavier's character is especially mishandled in this because it seems like they're trying to make him this flawed opportunist in how he's turned the X-Men into national heroes, and they're trying to make it seem like he's exploiting them, and they constantly refer to how Xavier kept some secrets from Jean Grey about her childhood, knowing that she probably wouldn't respond too well if she found out. And the movie makes it seem like he's completely in the wrong for doing this, yet honestly, telling Jean the truth about what happened, especially at such a young age, would have probably done more harm than good. It's shit like this that's very emblematic of the problems of the film, in that some of the ideas are there that could make for great drama, but the execution just doesn't really work at all. I think a lot of the problems with this movie stem from writer and director Simon Kinberg. It's his first effort in the director's chair, although he has served as an unofficial ghost director in the past, most notably on Fan Four Stick, and some of the previous X-Men films when Bryan Singer couldn't be asked to show up on sets. But with this film, I feel like he's bitten off a lot more than he can chew. His direction is just as flat and uninspired as his writing. Even the action, especially, is just dull and not that impressive, aside from a few individual moments where the mutants show off their powers. Admittedly, there is a few fun moments involving Magneto and Nightcrawler, which do work and are relatively entertaining in small doses, and the opening space rescue is undoubtedly the highlight of the film. It's this very bombastic, spectacular set piece that almost feels like something out of Interstellar or First Man. It's a very epic scene in what is otherwise a very stale and flat film that largely deflates for long stretches. And that's ultimately all I have to say about Dark Phoenix. Is it the worst film in the X-Men franchise? Not particularly, especially when we have X-Men Origins Wolverine to contend with, and I wouldn't even say it's on the same level as something like Catwoman or Fan Four Stick. It's just a very dull and insipid film, and honestly after seeing this, I'm more excited than ever to see what Disney is going to do with these characters. I'm not exactly keen on the Fox-Disney deal per se, but again, seeing what Disney will do with the X-Men is a far more exciting possibility than seeing what Fox would have done with these characters, especially if Dark Phoenix is anything to go by. I mean, I'm ready to see Disney give these characters life again, and as Batman Begins taught us, why do we fall? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up. And I'm hoping that's what the X-Men will do. They'll fall and pick themselves up again. So yeah, as you can tell, I really can't recommend this film. It's an extremely boring movie, and honestly, you'd just be better off watching the older ones again, and even Days of Future Past or Logan, because they serve as far more satisfying finales for this franchise than this film ever could. I'm gonna give Dark Phoenix a very light 4 out of 10. This movie revolves around teenager Maggie, played by Diana Silvers, who has just moved to a small town with her mother, played by Juliette Lewis, and befriended a group of teens. When trying to get alcohol, they ask a middle-aged woman, played by Octavia Spencer, to get some for them, and she complies. When she allows them to party and have fun in the basement of her house, the group can't believe their luck, but soon begin to realise that her hospitality is beginning to turn to obsession, and that beneath her chummy and affable demeanour lies an unstable and vengeful monster that threatens to ruin their lives. So I saw this movie on the same night that I saw Dark Phoenix. In fact, almost immediately after I saw Dark Phoenix, I went in to see Ma. The trailers were certainly pretty intriguing, and I'm always a big fan of weird, twisted, kind of fucked up movies, so I was pretty optimistic about this film going into it. I wasn't expecting a classic by any means, but I definitely was expecting something fun and entertaining. And that's pretty much what I got. I expected a good time, and I got a good time. In fact, you could even go as far as to say that I really enjoyed this film. Quite a lot, actually. Easily the main selling point of this movie is Octavia Spencer playing so wildly against type. We all know that she's a great actress, but I think this is probably the first time she's done a role like this before, and she absolutely kills it. Spencer shows so much range in the role, and the character is such an unhinged and unpredictable one, because one minute she's kind and caring, the next she's getting it on and dancing like nobody's business, and the next she's running over somebody with her fucking car. And Spencer matches this complex and volatile character with an equally nuanced and explosive performance that's funny, tragic, and terrifying in equal measures. The direction is also pretty damn solid too. The director of this movie is Tate Taylor, best known for his work on The Help, Get On Up, and The Girl on the Train. And he makes for a surprisingly effective horror director. He demonstrates a surprising amount of skill at building up tension, as well as creating a loose and irregular tone that can change at a moment's notice without feeling overly inconsistent or jarring. Not many filmmakers can pull that off, but Taylor manages to make it seem somewhat effortless. There's also a surprising amount of dark comedy sprinkled in for good measure. Like, it's really surprisingly funny in places. You'd be amazed at how many times the audience was laughing during the screening. The film's pacing is a little bit slow, however. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely not in a hurry to get anywhere, especially during its opening 20 minutes, which often kind of feels like it's out of a completely different film. But even after that, it does take a little bit of time to get going, and it doesn't exactly help that there are quite a few uses of cheap jump scares throughout the movie. Like, you know, the kind of jump scares where where somebody pops out of nowhere and it's like, oh, right, it's not actually threatening or real or anything. Like, it's not actually a real threat. It's those kind of jump scares, and usually I'm really not a fan of them, and unfortunately the movie does use them a little bit too often for my personal liking. But once the film gets past that and we begin to see that Ma's not quite as benevolent as she appears to be, we do get to see some pretty cool twists and turns, especially involving Luke Evans, who knew Ma in high school, which does add a lot of dread and uncertainty to their scenes, but it doesn't really become prominent until the second half. So Evans is left spending much of the first half of the movie shagging Missy Pyle, playing his girlfriend, who was also in high school with him and Ma, and it soon becomes clear that she has something of a vendetta against the both of them. And that's where I think the film does kind of fumble a little bit, because it's trying to tell two very different storylines, and I think the way they try to link them could have maybe been done a little bit better, because it's a very trashy and kind of nasty teen horror film, and it's also trying to be a bit of a trashy revenge film, and the two elements do kind of come together with a bit of an audible thud in places. And they do try to link it through how Maggie's mother is actually a former friend of Ma's, but by that point it doesn't really play into anything all that well, and it doesn't really become all that key until the film's climax. You understand why Ma is doing what she's doing, you understand her motivations, but at the same time you don't really understand why she has a vendetta against Maggie and her friends. They haven't really done anything all that nasty to her. Again, they just sort of seem like they're the wrong people at the wrong place at the wrong time. They sort of feel like they're characters out of a different movie at points. The teens themselves are largely one-dimensional, aside from McKaylee Miller as Haley, the other girl of the group besides Maggie, and Corey Fogelmandis as Andy, who's primarily defined as being the relatively straight-laced one of the group, so naturally he's the one that Maggie takes a liking to. The rest of the teens are largely disposable and kind of forgettable, and I don't think they're very memorable characters either, although the banter between them does largely feel very natural, and the actors do have a genuine sense of camaraderie between them, which does make up for these issues to a certain extent. The one exception to this, I would say, is easily Diana Silvers in the lead role of Maggie, the film's main protagonist. Aside from Spencer, she's easily the main highlight of the movie, and I think her performance in this is genuinely great. And when watching Ma, I did get the impression that she could carry a movie like this all by herself. I think she does make for a very promising screen queen, and I do think we're going to get, and I do hope we're going to see more of her in the future, because as Maggie, and I do think we're going to see more of her in the future. As Maggie, she's very much the audience surrogate. She's relatively clean-cut and quite likeable. I think she really embodies all the things that make for a good horror film protagonist. Overall, I'd say Ma's one of those films that very heavily benefits from its strong leading performance. If you took that away, you probably wouldn't have as good of a film without it, but nevertheless, Tate Taylor does a very solid job in creating a loose and unhinged tone, and it is an overall very fun and enjoyable movie. However, it doesn't go quite as far with its premise as I probably would have liked, and its lead characters outside of Spencer are largely kind of one-dimensional, but the performances and humour do make up for that, and I overall had a good time with this film. So while it does have its flaws, I will say I still had a really good time with it. I'm going to give Ma a light 7 out of 10. If you're into psychological horrors or films that are just the slightest bit unhinged and cookie bonkers, I would say this is worth checking out. I personally really quite liked it, and if anything, I'd recommend it purely on the strength of Octavia Spencer's performance alone. She practically carries the film and makes it her own, and you do get to see her dancing to Funky Town at one point, so that's gotta be worth something. I think the film alone is worth seeing just for that. And that's my reviews for both Dark Phoenix and Ma. Have you seen either of them yet? If so, what did you think of them? Did you like them? Did you not like them? What did you like about them? What did you not like about them? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like, leave a comment, maybe even subscribe to my channel while you're at it. If there's anything I can do to improve my presentation, do let me know. I'm always happy to hear feedback as long as it's somewhat constructive. If you want to follow me on social media or support me on Patreon or check out my website, links are below down in the description. And until next time, I'm Danny Quinn, and I hope you have a pleasant evening.